Good morning, everyone. You are more dead than the conference yesterday morning, this time that I addressed in Cape Town, 1,000 actuaries. There was no life in the conference, they looked bored, and I decided not to make jokes about actuaries. You know all the jokes about actuaries, like this new book, The Sex Life of Actuaries, it's 5 pages long. And you guys seem to be as dead as the actuaries, you know. And this is okay, sorry about that. And this is a horrible room in which to do a talk. First of all, it's a tent. Second of all, you're sitting way out of reach. So I'm going to have to sort of move down there and talk to you and put the mic in your face and that kind of thing. And so on. But thank you very much for the short introduction. I appreciate short introductions but sometimes you have to introduce this because, you know, sometimes people don't know you. And so on. And last year I spoke at the American Chamber of Commerce here in Jansen, fancy hotel, and I made a huge mistake. I should never have accepted it because the ambassador, Gibbs, asked me to speak there, the American ambassador, and when I looked at who came to this event, it was mainly American business people, but also actors and actresses. So you had these unbelievable handsome, men, particularly African-American men, tall and thin, all of them looking like they on, the Tim Noakes diet. And then you had these beautiful women, and so on. I said to myself, oh my gosh, you made a mistake. You should have not come. And because I was busy all day here in Johannesburg, etc., and I didn't shower that week. So I thought to myself, just go in, do your PowerPoint, and get the hell out of there. Unfortunately, one of the waiters saw me, and he ran towards me, and he said, oh, you are my hero. And he tried to put his arms around me. I can see you did math lit, you're a bit slow. So he tried to put his arms around me, and he hugged me and he said, and I just want you to know, he said to me, when I see you on TV, I'm so proud of you. And he went on and on and on, gushing. And he called his fellow waiter from the other side of the room and he said, Sipho, come over here. And poor Sipho came running with his tray. And he said, Sipho, do you know who this man is? And Sipho said, I have no idea. He said, this is Forrest Whitaker. I tried to say Denzel, but, it just didn't work. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me. It's the first time I've been invited to this incredible organization, the Purchasing Consortium. When I look at all of you, I now know where our money went and where it shouldn't have gone. But thank you for the incredible role you play and your leadership in giving us a consortium that, universities don't like to work together. They all like to think they're unique. Ask me, But the Purchasing Consortium is one of those success stories, and I want to thank you and the suppliers for your incredible role at making your services to universities efficient, but also, as I said, cooperative. So thank you very, very much to all of you. I want to talk to you about something that is that burdens me a lot. Did you know that if you're a professor, it's the only job in the world where they pay you to think? Did you know that? I'm not supposed to work. I'm just supposed to sit there and think, which makes you wonder what they do at WITS. But the idea of a professor is simply to think. So obviously I think about our country. And one of the things that worries me greatly, both as a university leader, as a leader in my family, as a leader or co-leader in my family, as a leader in my communities, one of the things that worries me greatly is in fact this very issue, which is the lack of leadership. And so I ask myself, why is it that whether you're talking about the churches and the mosques and the synagogues, or whether you're talking about schools and universities, or whether you're talking about, the domestic situation in our country with respect to parents and children, Why is it that it seems in the corporate world, everywhere, in government, we have this profound lack of leadership? Why is it, for example, that South Africa, when you get the annual World Economic Forum competitiveness reports, here's an oddity. If you can explain this to me, I'd be very happy. When it comes to auditing and accounting standards, South Africa's among the top 3 in the world. Did you know that? When it comes to science and math results, we're the bottom 3. How do you explain that? If you can give me the answer to that, I'll give you a big prize. But all of these things reflect, in the end, a lack of leadership. And what is it about leadership that makes this problem so serious? And it's something that I'm calling knowing the difference. So I think that one of the problems that we have, ladies and gentlemen, in leadership, whether it's in your unit of leadership on a campus or in your organization, is we don't know the difference between right and wrong. Now, let me just use a hypothetical example. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not into politics. I'm making this up. You cannot use other people's money to build your own house. You just can't do that. It's about knowing the difference between right and wrong. And we had, this is, by the way, this is just hypothetical. Please, please. And when you are unable to know that difference, all sorts of things go wrong in your country. By the way, did you realize that Minister Nene is about to hit you middle-class people with a massive tax rate? You know why? It's quite simple, because government has been wasting your money. And they must get that money from somewhere. The biggest cabinet in our history. Where do you think the money is going to come from? And when you don't know the difference between right and wrong, you get the kind of country that we're in right now. When parents in Kuruman and Olifantshoek take their kids out of school, have you ever thought we'd see this? Take their kids out of school because they want the municipality to build them a road, then you know that parents no longer know the difference between right and wrong. So at the University of the Free State, we've got something called the Takeneng Bridge, die brug, the students call it. This is where all the restaurants are. And so on Facebook the other day, I put out a message. I said, so students, let's presume one of the service providers forgot to lock the door, of their shop. And you coming home from coming to your res from the library, and you see that, the door of the restaurant is open. What will you do? A, call security and tell them the door is open. B, raid the shop. 83% of the students came back with answers that went like this. Ag professor, wees toch asseblief realisties. Just be realistic. In other words, we are going to raid the shop. This is a country in which people no longer know the difference between right and wrong. When Sibonda Ndebele was MEC for Transport in KZN, he said, I need to call the minister to find out whether I can take the Mercedes from the supplier that I gave the tender to. I just need to check. You don't check, it's wrong. When I got the job at the University of the Free State, I called my family members together and I said, I want you to know that as long as I work at the University of the Free State, you will never, ever get payment for anything that you do at this university. I don't care what your skills are. I don't care whether you qualify, but while I work here, you will not get a job. Now, by the way, legally they can. If you qualify for a job that you applied for, you can get the job. But ethically, as a leader, people are always going to ask the question, did they get the job because the rector? You understand? When you don't make clear-cut decisions between right and wrong, then you get the president's daughter working in a government department fairly high up when she should still be as a snot nurse in school somewhere. It's because we don't know the difference between right and wrong that a minister can get a boyfriend involved in the contracting. If that is the consequence of a lack of leadership that knows the difference between right and wrong. So my wife is very upset with me because she grades hotels. And so the student accommodation people said, can you please help us grade off-campus accommodation so that we can tell the students in advance, this is a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, and so on, so that they don't go, to a place that's sloppy. And then they wanted to pay her, and I said to my friend Quentin Kutan, if you pay my wife, it's your last day on this job. It's wrong. She might have the skills, but it is inappropriate for a leader to allow that to happen. And when you have a country that's not sure, I don't know if you had a mother. I had a mother. I was very unfortunate to have parents called Sarah and Abraham. Trust me, that's bad news. That is bad, bad news, especially if they're born again. It's bad news. And so from the day, that was really the name, from the day I was born, you got a whole lot of stuff, chilies in your mouth, if you told a lie, if you did anything wrong. I think in our country the problem is that our children don't know early on the difference between right and wrong. That is why adults in this country, when they get angry, they burn down libraries. Did you ever think that would happen? That is why adults in our country, when they get students, when they get angry, they don't just protest, which is their democratic right. At TUT, they burn cars and buses. That's bullshit, I'm sorry. That management should have told them there's a difference between right and wrong. I remember when my son was 3 years old, we lived in another country where I was studying, and I was a new father, and I didn't know much about how to raise kids. And suddenly our 3-year-old son went stiff, like this, just stiff. He kicked and screamed and lay on the floor. And I started to call 911, thinking, here is a medical emergency. But my wife was always more wise than me. She looked at this and she just was whistling. I said, how can you whistle at a time like this? Call 911. Anyway, 3 minutes later, this boy was done. And he stood up, and I'll never forget what my wife said to him. She looked at him, and she said, Mikhail, that is what they call a tantrum. That was your first tantrum. That was also your last tantrum. Man, I wish they would tell the TUT students and the students at Walter Sisulu's Butterworth campus, that was your first fucking tantrum. That is also your last tantrum. But a university is public property. You see, unlike a company, a university doesn't exist for today. The university exists for tomorrow, for your grandchildren. Universities, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples. By the way, to my friends who are Hindu, happy Diwali. May you have a wonderful day. We make such a bloody fuss about Christmas, but when it comes to Diwali, you hardly know how to spell the word. But happy Diwali to all of you. This is the problem. And our vice-chancellors are often too scared of the students. Do you know at Wits University, their budget for the SRC, just for the SRC, is our total budget for the whole student affairs management portfolio. How can you give kids so much money? That's wrong. And that is why they throw tantrums. And that is why nobody's got the guts to tell them. So I couldn't care whether you're from Timbuktu. I will say what I want to say. It is wrong. We don't know the difference between right and wrong. Number two, we don't know the difference between passing and excelling. In this country, let me tell you, if you've got political ambitions, I can tell you how to get to the top. The dumber you are, the higher you go. You don't need to really have education. When Julius Nyerere became president of Tanzania, he was Dr. Julius Nyerere. When Kenneth Kaunda became president of Zambia, he was highly educated. When Robert Mugabe, of all fiends in the world, became president, he went through a good education. In this country, we pride ourselves on the fact that our leaders don't have education. Now, this is not a judgment of people who sacrificed in the struggle. Don't get me wrong. This is about what is it that we treasure? What is it that we value? And that is why in this country, you can pass with 30% and 40%, Steve Biko must be turning in his grave. You see, they tell the wrong story about Biko. He was actually a medical student before they threw him out. Neville Alexander had a PhD from Tübingen. These were people who struggled and sacrificed and went to prison, but they made sure in those days, when it was difficult, that they got an education. Listen to your Minister of Basic Education. These are not my words. Really, as a teacher myself, now when you read that, dan weet jy, as they say in my other language, hier kom kak. Really, as a teacher myself, 30% for a slow learner is fine. Can I ask you something, ma'am? Will that be fine for your child?
No.
No, you'll kick them under the bloody butt. It means that 70% of the work is not known to them. How can you give a kid who didn't even start and give the message that really, as a teacher, I wish you said that as a pastor or, or as a, but as a teacher, that's the problem with our country. We expect too little from our young people. And by the way, not all of us are smart. My students often say to me, "Yeah, Prof, it's easy for you to raise the academic standards here, but you must understand we're not as clever as you." And then I tell them my story, and then I show them. I've actually kept my primary school reports. Did you know when I was in primary school, my math marks were negative integers? Negative whole numbers, for those of you who don't know what an integer is. Because in those days, they took away marks if you guessed, remember? Now they give you marks. If you look like me, they give you marks just for showing up. 5% just for showing up. What a bloody insult. We expect too little, and my colleagues here from the university will tell you, for the first time in years, our student pass rates have gone up. Remarkably, why? Because we told the students we expect much of you. And the rest of them, we send to potch. And so sorry, I got to pick on someone. We don't know the difference between position and influence. Let me tell you something as a leader. I said this at UCT the other night when we were debating transformation. You can pretend that you have power as a vice-chancellor, but actually you don't. The power lies up and down the organization. And the way in which you change an organization is not through krachtdadigheid, not by exercising it's not by putting those fancy labels. That's why I hate it when people call me professor or they call you by your titles. And that's why I'm so glad the brother made a short introduction. Because you don't become great because of your titles. You become great because of how you live your life. And unfortunately, these morons who drive around with these blue light brigades, who've never been famous for anything, suddenly get pumped up with this importance. I don't stand up for a minister in any meeting. Why? I only stand up for God. I don't stand up for human beings. Respect is not something that comes with a title. Respect is what you earn as a result of your life. And that is the big difference between having position and influence. And I can tell you now that the main problem in South Africa, the reason kids don't listen to us, either our children at home or our students at university, they don't listen to us because our lives are inadequate as leaders. But if you lead them correctly, your children will be better than you. Okay? So how do I know you guys are already in trouble? Why do I know that you are bad leaders as parents? Because at all but 2 of the tables in this room, black people are sitting with black people and white people are sitting with white people. Don't you talk to me about transformation until you transform yourself. I know you're not going to invite me back again, but that's fine. You will not be the first organization. This is bullshit. How do you expect your kids to grow up normally when you live an abnormal life? I was so upset with my son last year. because he decided to marry a white girl, and I was very upset. So 2 weeks before the wedding, he drove down from Pretoria with his fiancée at the time, Catherine Cat. He said, "Dad, you can no longer avoid meeting Cat's parents." So my wife and I climbed into the car in Bloemfontein, drove up to Pretoria to meet the enemy. So we booked a restaurant in Linwood there near Oricon, opposite City Lodge. Nice restaurants there. And on the one side of the table sat the black Jansens, and on the other side sat the white Bartletts. And I decided to first let the green stuff come by before I struck. So the salads came by. I said nothing. And my son came to me tiptoeing, because he and Kat were sitting on the edges of their seats. He says, "Dad, whatever you do not embarrass me." I said, "Son, have I ever embarrassed you?" And he just rolled his eyes. And then came the red meat. And those of you who know me would know that I'm a wordsmith. Every word is prepared in advance. So I spoke to these white people as if they were deaf. I said, "So, what first crossed your minds when my son decided to darken your doorstep?" Woo! Catherine's mother, Brenda, was, as they say in my second language, sy was nie op haar bek geval nie. She immediately responded. And she said, "Why?" And you know, she spoke working class English. I love working class English. I hate Cape Town, Kirsten Bosch, Rhonda Bosch English. Those people who talk English as if they're still in the Midlands in England, you know, with the nose. So I like plat Engels, you know. And she said, "Well," I said to myself, Brenda, I said, "Are you truly a non-racist?" So the first time she sees my black kid, what goes through her head is a question. Are you truly a non-racist? I jumped up from my side of the table, ran towards her, gave her a big hug. It had to be big because she's big. And I said, "Welcome to our family. I can work with you because you're not like all these bloody South Africans who think they dropped out of thin air into this troubled country. Because like you, I'm struggling to get over these ghosts. But our children, thank God, are better than us. They are better than us. PURCO, you have a role to play in the transformation of this country. And if you ever invite me again, and I see a whole lot of black people sitting next to one table, and a whole lot of white folks sitting next to one table, I will walk straight out because you're making no contribution." That's how people get angry. That's what puts our country at risk. And your children will observe you, and they will behave like you. And the only reason our children are like that is because since the day they were born, they saw people in our home who were Jewish, who were Muslim, people who didn't look like them, didn't pray like them, didn't make love like them when they married. The home was always a place in which you heard all South Africa's languages, but also international languages. And so for them, normal is not sitting the way you sit. Normal was everybody. I remember when they came home from primary school in Westville in Durban, and my kids were really amused and puzzled. They said, "Dad, somebody called us colored. What are we, Dad?" I was so upset because we've never given our kids apartheid nicknames. We've always called them human. And by the way, just for you South Africans, can I just get this off my chest while you're here? I've got bad news for you. This is going to come. Yesterday I said it to the actuaries. I've never seen 1,000 people come alive so quickly. Just by South African definitions, you are all colored. I'm so sorry. I realize for my white brothers and sisters, this could be very traumatic. Because when I say to South Africans, give me a definition of colored, they say mixed race. I said, oh, no, that helps me a lot. Because you're all colored. How do you live together for 350 years and not screw each other? Did you really think the farmer went only to farm? And white folk here, if you were absolutely honest, remember, you always had a question about Uncle Dennis. Why is it always a Dennis? His hair didn't quite go the way everybody else's hair went. If you had to be absolutely honest, amen? So stop this apartheid nicknames by which we call each other. We're actually all human. And some of you forget that they used to reclassify people every year. This is how mad we were. People became one thing one year and another thing the next year. We can't live in that space. We need to know the difference between tolerance and embrace. Now, there's a beautiful word I learned in Afrikaans called verdra, which carries the meaning more powerfully of what I want to convey to you. So, a lot of people will say to me, oh, you weet, ons het geen probleem. We don't have a problem. Oh, we will tolerate the other person. No, I'm sorry. Tolerate is not good enough. Embrace is good enough. And I love it when white parents, when I do workshops with white parents, they would say to me, no, but Professor, our children have no problem with black kids. I said, yes, until they hit puberty. And then you start to give signs because you're so scared that your kid is going to fall in love with a black person. That's really what it's about. You're scared. And that is why in South Africa, I study schools for a living all my life. You'll notice there's a tipping point. The moment the number of black kids get too many, the white parents flee everywhere. Except in the Anglican schools, except in the church schools. The problem is not the kids, the problem is you. And we won't create a normal country unless we deal with our own ghosts, just to be normal. And I am so proud of my students, because with all the difficulties over the 5 years that I've been there, I've seen them move from being very angry with each other to respecting and embracing each other. I spoke at a Sanlam conference last year. I'll never forget this as long as I live. And they had like 2,000-3,000 people in the Cape Town Convention Center, people hooked up to Australia and other places. So I was sort of on a platform like that, but a bit higher. And people sat in tables like this. And right in front was a table of Afrikaans-speaking guys. And I was telling them that the audience, that my biggest problem at the University of the Free State at the moment is interracial love affairs. And of course, it's not a problem for the kids. It's a problem because the fathers would respond, and the kids would tell me, and my pa say, "Ek gaan my doodmaak." Never the mother. I always wonder where the mothers are in this story. And I was telling this story about my biggest problem being interracial love affairs, and around this table in the front, I hear the one Afrikaans guy say to the other, "Nee, fok my kind gaan potch toe." My kid is going to Potch University. To be a normal country, you will have to give the lead and know the difference between knowledge. When Nelson Mandela died, the Associated Press caught this picture, which is my favorite picture. You might remember that people just sort of spontaneously gathered at Madiba's home in Houghton, and somebody in the Citizen published this picture. And I thought to myself, this is a picture not just of black and white, but of generational difference. This is a beautiful picture of gender. This is a beautiful picture of love. That in that moment, the one person that brought us together, more than anyone else, in his death, he couldn't have asked for a better gift, parting gift, than this young man and this older woman. They're not tolerating each other. They are embracing each other. And this requires You see, transformation for me is not employment equity. Transformation for me is, I've been reading, I've not read the Bible for many years because my parents forced me to read it. I memorized much of it at one point, the way people memorize the Holy Quran. So, I don't know, but every now and again, something in the Bible sort of just gets my attention. And I was reading about this guy in the Bible. He used to be a convict. And his name was Saul. And then he fell off his horse, and they gave him a new name, Paul. And he used to write letters to churches. And one of his letters in the Christian scriptures was to the Romans. And he writes to these guys, and he gave a definition for transformation that goes back to the roots of the word. There's a fancy English word for that, the etymology of the word, the original meaning, roots. And the word is actually metamorphosis. The way you talk about how a caterpillar changes into a butterfly. And he says to this church, don't be transformed according, okay, he didn't use these words, according to the Department of Labor's definition of transformation. He says, be transformed in the renewing of. Brother, you must go to church, man. Be transformed in the renewing of your mind. In other words, change the way in which you think about yourself and others. That's transformation. The rest will happen. The rest will happen. We don't know the difference between emotions and cognition. Leadership is not about leading with the head. Leadership, I can assure you, is about leading with the heart. And if you think that Welsh is correct, that stupid books in the airport, oh, you know, I took my company by the scruff of the neck and I changed it from deficits into profits and I fired 5,000 people and look at the graphs. Listen, that is the Tarzan model of leadership. That belongs in the 18th century. In the 21st century, you cannot simply lead people, particularly a broken people, which you all are. You cannot lead only with your head. You have to lead with your heart. In today's Times column, I wrote about the student from a place called Vrygrond. Anybody know where Vrygrond is in Cape Town? It's where you go when you're suicidal. You want to end your life, you go to Vrygrond. You won't come out in one piece. It's like Umlazi in Durban. You go there when you've given up on life. J section. J section. I used to work there. And this student came all the way from Vrygrond with a little case from a dirt poor area, violence prone. And she says to me, I came to study at Bloemfontein. I said, my girl, you're too late. We don't have money at this stage of the year. But because I knew Vrygrond, we got the money somewhere and made it possible for her to study. And so she's finishing her first year, and she's gotten distinctions in everything. And I had my talk to me sessions. What happens is once every 2 weeks or so when I'm in town, I sit outside under a tree and I tell the students, just come talk to me. So last week, the student came to talk to me from Vrygrond. And I remembered her. And I looked at her academic record and I said, oh my goodness me, she's done so well. And then she said something I will never forget. She said, Professor, tell me something. Are you proud of me? Are you proud of me? I packed my bag, ran to the car, drove back to my office because I was not going to allow anybody to see me cry. You see, she's not asking, do you like my marks? She's not asking, did you see how I progressed in mathematics and in chemistry? What she wants to know is, are you proud of me? And very often what your colleagues want to know, it's not these bloody performance management schedules, it's rubbish. What they want to know is, are you connected to me? Are you proud of me? Leadership changes people, not just when you lead with the head, but when you lead with the heart. Do you know if President Zuma, if I was his advisor, if I was Kaz Lubisi, who's a very smart mathematician, he's just in the wrong place as DG in the presidency. I've known him for many years. But if I was Kaz, I'd go up to number one and I'd say, Mr. President, you've got the report from the public protector. Don't defend the report. Don't give it to lawyers. Don't give it to, and I'd use a really original phrase, pay back the money. No, I wouldn't put it that way. But I'd say, Mr. Prez, I want you to go on primetime television tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Interrupt the news. And tell the 40 million South African citizens, ladies and gentlemen, you voted me into power. I just want to tell you, I might not agree with everything in the public protector's report, but it is the public protector. I will follow these recommendations and pay back money that I believe I was badly advised on and pay it back. Do you know what South Africans would say? We forgive you, Mr. President. That's how we are as people. That's how we are as people. In other words, people won't be judging the president on the financial calculations. They'd be judging him on his emotional leadership, on connecting with us as followers. That's the difference. Whew. I must finish up. But we need to know the difference between social justice and transformation. And I just gave a story, a tragic story at UKZN, that because the student they discovered afterwards was Indian, whatever that means, after 3. They first gave her a SMS saying she can come to medical school. And then when they called her and heard her name, they said, no, sorry, you can't come anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, this is wrong. This is wrong. You need to know the difference. And you need to know the difference between saying and doing. Okay? When those 30,000 pairs of eyes watch me every single day, I know. No policy. If you in your organization or your department have a vision and a mission statement, can I ask you a favor, please? When you get back tomorrow, take it down and throw it away. It's meaningless. It's meaningless. It's the biggest rubbish in any organization. Vision that, mission that. I only do it because my council said if you don't do it, we'll fire you. It's meaningless. The vision and the mission is you as a leader. It's your example. Okay? And that is what people watch. So if my students saw that the only friends who come over to braai at my home on a Saturday night after the Bulls beat the Stormers. Sorry, I've got short-term memory loss, Then, and the oldest people look like me, go to my church, speak my language. If they see that, they will think that's normal. But they will also realize that I can't talk non-racialism, I can't talk integration if I don't live that as a leader. Same applies to you in your leadership, wherever you might be. Know the difference between saying and doing. Thank you very much.